You, Rick. All right, Councilmember Khamis.
Thank you, Mayor. And I want to start by focusing on how this legislation will actually hurt small businesses, ethnic-owned businesses, and decrease competition and increase the bureaucracy of all these contracts that we do for our own projects. And I really understand what the mayor had to do. Union leaders, threatened that they were going to do a ballot measure that would have basically killed development in the city of San Jose. So I understand where the mayor was coming from in negotiating something that was less egregious. I do have, however, problems with several of the details here. And I'll start by saying that the council needs to understand that this deal would actually hurt taxpayers. It'll hurt homeowners and it'll hurt the middle class. In fact, our previous compromise in October, our mayor already assessed that PLA CWAs would actually lead to a 15% cost increase for all the work that is subjected to this deal. So here are my three priority concerns. That the taxpayers, first, are paying twice for the same work under this PLA. Here's what I mean. This will force non-union employers to pay into union pension funds even if they get the contract, and those union employees won't actually get the benefit from the payment made into the pension funds. This is something that council was very much against. Sylvia Arenas actually spoke out against this last time, and I applaud her for doing so. So at the end, this double payment will actually cost taxpayers more. And item number 1 of the mayor's memo, this is the bond proposal. I just want to be clear, City Attorney, is this going to be a parcel tax, or how are we going to pay for this proposal?
Yes, it will. I mean, it results in anytime you issue a GO bond, a general obligation bond, it requires, in order to pay it back, an amount that is added to the property tax rolls. That's disclosed in the ballot book by law. And so whatever that amount would be, it really depends on how much you want to borrow.
To clarify, it could be a parcel or a property tax, is that right?
Well, it is a property tax. Yeah.
Okay.
It's part of it's on the property tax rolls.
Well, it's ad valorem or parcel, yeah, okay.
So there is going to be a new tax if we move forward with this, potentially going on the ballot. And if that is the case, I definitely want it to be prioritized because we've actually taxed our constituents twice, once on Measure B and once on Measure G, and we promised to do a lot in those two measures, some of the same stuff that's being discussed in this compromise, in fact. And this, by the way, the Measure B and Measure G were also part of a previous compromise not to put a gross receipts sales tax on the ballot, something that unions have already brought up again in discussions on PLAs. So I'm very concerned, and I want to make sure that not only is what the measure actually outlines what we're going to do with this money, but also very clearly in the ballot says how much taxpayers will actually pay. And I'm also concerned about changing the charter language for contracting from lowest responsible bidder to best value. And while I understand the mayor's assertions, I read his memo. I know I wasn't there for some of the things, but I was there for some of the fiascos, and I don't know if some of them were union contractors or non-union contractors. So I don't know that Apple was a union or non-union shop.
You're referring to Applegate?
Applegate, yeah.
I'm not sure it matters.
Right. Yeah. Well, I mean, and I don't know how best value will actually be interpreted. So the word best value, to me, leaves a lot of things open to interpretation. And I want to ask Rick, is it possible to change the interpretation? If this passes in this type of language, couldn't anyone on a given Tuesday change the meaning of best value?
Well, it really depends on what's proposed to the voters. You could put what best value means in the charter amendment, and then the voters would have the criteria of what you look for in determining best value. Alternatively, you could say, as determined by council, the council could adopt an ordinance saying, here's the criteria for best value. In that case, that could be changed. So it really depends on how it's structured and what goes to the voters. And,
Yeah.
and the council would decide that.
So yeah, I guess this is a discussion that is going to be had in the future, I surmise, but I want to make sure that best value doesn't turn into best friend when it comes into contracting. You know, it opens the doors for politics, cronyism, and I could see where this language could potentially be abused. While I do share some of the concerns that the mayor has with our current language, I would like us to explore also what can be done with our current language to mitigate some of the concerns that the mayor also has. So, but the main benefit from this compromise, what I see is supposed to be protecting the developers, the for-profit developers that are non-city projects. But I don't think it does protect homeowners at all. In fact, the middle class is actually going to get hurt from this because we definitely are talking about putting on a new tax. And since there'll be less money for projects because there'll be potentially less competition for all these, with all these new PLA regulations, it's going to cost taxpayers more. And where will this compromise end up? I heard and actually seen this in a Mercury News article where one of the arbitrators here with the mayor was quoted as saying this is a good first step. So what's the next step? What are we going to end up with? And I don't know what kind of trust is being built when unions continue to use the same ballot initiatives to beat us over the head to making compromises that hurt the middle class. So I'm asking my colleagues here, I'm not going to, I read the tea leaves, I know where this is going, but I just want us to consider some of the things that I've proposed in my memo. Protecting the non-union trade schools by changing one word, which is part 6 in my memo, from Exhibit A to item B, on item B, to include the nationally accredited apprentice programs, because we don't want to exclude apprentice programs regardless. We want to teach people how to become, employed and contractors, whether they're union or not. I don't think we should be discriminating against that. And if it's not clear, it could be, again, interpreted in a different direction. I'm hoping that we could take out the double payment for pension benefits as well. And I'm hoping that we can add the language that makes the exceptions to the new rules clear, that fee waivers are the same as fee reductions, and so that it's clear that private development is exempt and that rules won't apply when property is leased or transferred at market value. I know that this is getting into the weeds, but a lot of these things could be interpreted in a different way by lawyers, and I just want to be clear so that we don't come back with future lawsuits. If we're truly trying to exempt public projects, let's make the language as clear as possible. That way we don't have to run into any of these problems in the future. And I don't see what's wrong with passing Part 9. Let's evaluate this after a couple of years. Let's see how we fared, how our taxpayers fare after this. Let's draw a line, find out how much we're paying today for certain amounts of projects, and find out how much it's costing us after we implement this program. I don't think I'm being really unreasonable in many of the requests. My colleagues in the previous compromise were with me on some of these things. The current compromise went from $6 million to $3 million. It actually included several other items that weren't in there before. And ultimately, this mandate will end up costing our taxpayers may end up costing jobs, because if we had fewer tax dollars to spend on these projects, we can have less projects, and that means less jobs. And so these are my concerns. I'm hoping that, well, I'll make a motion to accept the concerns that I put forward in my memo, which does accept the mayor's memo in my memo. So I'm hoping that I can get a second on that.
A motion and second. Councilman Khamis, I appreciate your sincere efforts to try to address some of the concerns that you've identified in the proposal, which I'd be the first to admit is not perfect. All settlements are imperfect. But let me just address a few concerns you raised. One about the apprenticeship programs. I am not knowledgeable in this area. I don't pretend to be. The conclusion that we came to is that if apprenticeship program was certified by the state, whether it was open shop or union, it would qualify. I don't really have a horse in that race, and I don't pretend to know. The federal standards, I'm sure somebody in the audience, since we've got several folks who are pretty knowledgeable in these issues, I'm certainly happy to hear them explain to me what it is about federal standards that are equal to or better than state standards. But one thing that became apparent to me as we were going through this negotiation, I did learn a lot through this process, and I appreciate the very knowledgeable people who participated, but we worked on alternatives, for example, having fees that could be used to support apprenticeships. And ultimately what I learned was that there's just not a lot of programs in the South Bay. We were working in constant communication with ABC. To my knowledge, they don't have a program south of Livermore. And so we could sort of generate a lot of heat, but not much light, figuring out how we're going to ensure we get every program in. But to be relevant for residents here in San Jose, we need to have programs in San Jose or somewhere closer by, right? So I don't feel strongly one way or another, but obviously if folks on the other side of the negotiation table do, then if we're going to start changing terms, then we got to figure out what else we're going to give. And so I am certainly open to anyone's view about whether a state or national standard is the better one. We negotiated state. I'm willing to stick with that because that's what we negotiated. And as long as the state standard is not discriminatory, I don't have any reason to believe it's adverse. The concern about, what's the next stop that you raised, what other demands might be made or whatever. The point of having an agreement that everybody would sign is that there are clearly terms here, as articulated in the memorandum, that would say we're not coming back to reconsider, for example, what restrictions might be imposed on private development. That's an issue that we've resolved. As long as we have this ordinance in place, we've resolved it. So that's the point of having an agreement. I can understand the concern. In terms of waiver versus reduction, again, I don't have strong views one way or another. I'd venture to guess if what we saw from a third-party consultant was that virtual elimination of a fee is somehow required to get a shovel in the ground in some category of development, or subcategory that is, then we could always reduce the fee to $1. It's the same thing as a reduction if people are really splitting hairs between waivers and reductions. I don't think it's going to make a difference. Ultimately, we'll get to whatever number the data and the evidence leads us to. And I certainly am happy to evaluate something after a couple years. I just think we are all going to have a very difficult time assessing how much did this affect the price of any particular capital project, because you don't have a control. In any experiment, you need to have a control and then a variable. All we have in this case is we know what the bids were, and we don't know what to compare that to exactly. I'd venture to guess 5 years from now or 2 years from now, whatever the number is, it's going to be more than it is today, because construction costs always seem to go up, except in really bad recessions. And so I just think it's going to be a difficult thing for us to evaluate, but sure, we can, I'm always happy to evaluate, and I think, as you know, on any given Tuesday, or you can always have a council study session or a meeting to discuss it. I'm open to that. I just don't think, again, I think you're going to generate more heat than light, because I don't think we're going to be able to know the answer no matter how well we study it.
Mayor, I don't want to take all of what you said, but at least at the apprenticeship program, there are some programs that are being done even at local schools here that are basically done by continuing education schools and other things. But the apprenticeship program language, if we only put the state in there, the unions can go to the state and ask the state to change the legislation to only allow state-run programs instead of federally run programs. So that's the fear there, that it's easier to change state law than it is to change federal laws. And so they're pretty much the same programs, but if we don't include national standards, then the fear would be that somebody's lobbyists will go and lobby for state legislation to exclude those in the future, and then cut off avenues for people with other apprenticeship programs.